Alright, welcome to Talking with Famous People. I am the host of Talking Famous People, host Zachary. We have host Eric, and we have our famous person, Michael. Um, Michael, when you're not listening or talking to someone, what are you thinking about?
Can you say that again?
So when you're not listening to someone or talking to someone, so when you're not actively engaging with someone, what are you thinking about?
As in if I'm by myself or with other people?
And by yourself, I guess.
There's a lot of things I think about. I think about life in general. I mean, it just scares me that, like tomorrow's not promised. So to me, it makes me think that if there's something else out there, and if so, I need to go after it.
I see.
Are you worried about limited amount of time in your life?
Not necessarily, but what happens after this?
Hmm.
Or you're worried a lot about the afterlife?
Yes.
Well, what about the during life? Do you think that that's how one prepares for the afterlife?
I think it depends on what religion you have. But for me, Christianity, I believe so.
And so is it based on your behaviors?
Not necessarily, because in Christianity I'd be going toward the Ten Commandments and towards the Old Testament. But because the Old Testament is for people who are not believers, and Scripture tells us that it's guidelines to be like Christ and go towards Christ. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily your actions, but just following after God and just loving people really.
But would that be reflected mostly in your actions or in your words or in something that happens inside of you?
I think both, because just because I say I'm a millionaire doesn't mean I'm a millionaire. Just because I can't go into a gas station and buy gas with my words. I think that your actions have to speak louder than your words most of the time, or all the time actually. Because it's easy to say you're anything, but let your actions speak for you. That's how I see that.
Mm-hmm.
And so is your principal action to you a moral, principled, good action is one that's altruistic, that concerns yourself with the well-being of others first over yourself, or would you describe it as something else?
I think it's something you got to work on yourself first, because before I went to Christianity, there's these people, and they were bad influences, and for me to stay there was not good. So me going to Christianity, I had to work on myself first before I could work on other people, because if I'm not stable, I can't help someone else, because I'll fall right back into the place I was before. So what I had to do is I had to work on myself first and build my foundation before I could help someone else. I can't help someone else if I'm not helping myself.
So do you feel that Christianity is the only barrier between you and the darker place that you emerged from?
Yes. I wouldn't call it a barrier though. I would call it I'll just call it wise decisions.
Right. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how long ago did you make this transition from non-Christian to Christian?
3 years ago, probably. But the thing is, though, before I called myself a Christian, so I would say that I really became a believer and became a Christian about a year ago, because it was something that when I first went into church, I believed that all I had to do was say I believe in God and I can do what I want to. I can go party, do this and do that, and I'm saved. Like, I can do whatever I want. But I found out real quick that's not what Christianity is about. And so I say about 1 year ago is when I actually came into Christianity and actually went full throttle into it, and not make excuses, not just stick my foot into the Christianity and F out.
So to what extent do you indicate that things like partying and stuff? I mean, I tend to agree with you. I think it's a poor use of time. But my question is, to what extent do you think those things are sinful or contrary to God's will?
Well, first I think that those things can be idols, and I think that we all have idols in our life that we don't even realize. For me, one was partying, and I think what an idol is something that whenever you're sad or you're happy, whatever emotion you have, is what you cling to, or where you spend your most time. That could be an idol. So for me, it was partying, and with partying, that is what I did whenever I was sad or anything. So that was my idol. So I
Does
think
that mean
idol,
drinking primarily, or
yes, drinking, and I think that where you spend your time is where your passion is at. So for me, my false idols, all these things in this world, with whether it be partying or whatever it might be, they don't feel us as we think we do. We go to them so they can give us happiness or relief, but if they gave us true happiness or relief, we wouldn't have to keep going back to those things.
Well, I agree with you that partying is not likely to provide anybody any kind of lasting satisfaction. I partied plenty my whole life, and I can agree with you 100% that there's very little to be taken away from it that lasts. When you're 45 years old, I don't think back to important parts of my life and remember parties. I remember getting drunk and think fondly about those times at all. I think, to the extent that I remember them at all, I think of them as misguided youthful indiscretions or misguided, just displays of my own damage, I guess. But but the thing about that is, different people have different relationships with partying, right? Mm-hmm. So an ENTP, somebody like me, is gonna go way overboard, and maybe you're the similar type. I don't know. But
what would you?
Other people have different relationships with it, right?
Yeah, my question is, what do you think about people who So Eric said he looks back over his life and those times that he did engage in like drinking and partying, stuff like that. He doesn't view that as a significant part of his life or something that is fulfilling, right? What would you say?
Well spent. I don't view it as time well spent.
Right. What would you say to someone who identifies their time spent partying and spent doing drugs as fulfilling activities? How would you?
I say if it fulfilled you, that you wouldn't have to keep going back to it. That's what I would say. Because it seems that just with drugs, whether it be drinking, the more you drink, the more tolerant you get, the more you have to drink. It's always that next step. Just like in life, if your idol is money, I want to make $100,000. But once you reach $100,000, you're not going to quit. Okay, now we'll make $200,000. It's never ending. It's always the next thing to get you where you want to fulfill you. But in reality, it never does fulfill you. It just makes you keep wanting more and more.
Right. How do you feel it's best utilized? What method do you feel is best utilized to help convince people that they are experiencing some sort of addiction or falling into like a dark hole like that?
I wouldn't even really talk about it being convincing someone. It's more just me being able to tell them where I was and where I came from and what brought me there. Because for me, as Christians do, they spend a lot of time in church arguing and discussing things that don't really matter and condemning people for no reason. Because the only thing Christianity is about really is love. So if I'm condemning you, it's not me really loving you. Because, see, religion doesn't change, but with religion, you need a relationship. Because me loving you, it can also bring you to God. Just as in the quote says that you might be the only Bible somebody reads. If I'm over there saying, you do this, I don't like you, if I push myself away from those people, that's not what Jesus did. What did Jesus do? He went to the hookers. He went to the tax collectors. He went to those people. He went to them. He went to those people who were lost. He didn't really focus on those people who were saved. He went to the people who were lost, and that's who he went to.
I like how you're including the tax collectors in that group.
Yeah.
I don't like them either.
We kind of incline toward libertarianism around here, so.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I get what you're saying about going back to it again and again, but I mean, I think when we're to be contrary or argumentative, one would point out that they're not. It doesn't really distinguish it from your faith. For example, you go back to that again and again, and it provides you some sort of more lasting satisfaction. So there's got to be some better way to distinguish between that which is fulfilling and that which is not, than simply repetition of behavior.
I think if it fulfills you, you don't have to keep coming back to it. That's the thing with religion, because you can't just say I believe in God and then I'll go party and do all these different things. Because Jesus tells us that you have to repent daily. And what repent means do a 180 and go the opposite way.
But what I'm saying is that might be a good criteria. That criterion would make sense, except I'm saying there's got to be a better way to describe what we're talking about here. Because if we're using that method, that description of going back to it again and again, then that would apply to your faith as well. You're going back to that daily, you said, again and again, and it's providing you some lasting satisfaction that's different from the lack of satisfaction you get in partying.
Yeah, but
so I'm saying, what's the mechanism? Is not just going back to it again and again. There's got to be something else there besides just repetition,
Well, I think
right?
the difference between something like something that exists in the external world and faith, for example, is that faith is uh, it's a substance without um, it's not subject to the process of the external world, right? It's not your faith isn't going to be it's something that's like it exists within your internal abstract realm, right? And it manifests impressions upon you from that realm, as opposed to the external world, which is just subject to change based on circumstance. You have a according to the Christian paradigm, you have a conscious choice over whether you choose faith or not, as opposed to you don't really choose whether or not um, something provides you satisfaction in the external world. It just kind of does, right? You have a choice over whether or not you choose to put significance into it. And what he's saying is that choosing to put significance into it doesn't bring any fulfillment, but choosing to believe in something internally abstract will. So I think it's there's a difference in substance there.
Okay. I mean, I like that distinction a lot. It begs the question, or not begs the question. It elicits the question: what's the substance there then that we're talking about exactly? You know. But
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking today earlier. I have a thought on religion and God in general today. It was occurring to me that for something, quantum mechanics or quantum rules or whatever tell us that something has to be observed to exist. Now, the old-fashioned paradigm that I always heard was God's everywhere and sees everything, right? So it's an odd thing that sort of the existence of observers, like we have feelings within ourselves that we are not sharing with other
So
people,
morals don't
and or
exist.
moments within ourselves that are not being shared with anybody. Who is observing those? Ourselves? Can a thing observe itself
Yeah, that I feel like
into existence?
yeah, that's the thing. It's like when you follow the logic of like if quantum physics are right in predicting that we have to observe something for it to exist, what does that say about things like morals or algebraic expressions, right?
Well,
That's
we
what I was.
observe those.
Where do we get our morals from? Where do we what is the stick where we determine what's good and what's bad?
Well, that's what I'm saying is like we I don't think that anyone would argue that morals don't exist, right? But
Where do they come?
you can't empirically observe them, but that doesn't mean they don't exist, right? So like
Okay, well, I want to address that question in a second, but first, I think we're missing the point I'm trying to make here, which is, I think, significant, which is there are things within us that we don't share with anybody else.
mhm.
It might be because it's of no significance, really, or it might be because it's some deep, dark secret, or whatever. There are some things within us that exist that we don't share with somebody else. Now, my point is, if we take the quantum law and say, to exist, something has to be observed. If can a thing observe itself into existence? And if not, then doesn't that presuppose some sort of super observer or God who's there to witness the internal narrative of the main character in your play? Lest that internal narrative not exist unless it's spoken aloud, which would be odd because it would have no possible way of being realized before being spoken aloud. You know, it wouldn't mean anything to speak something aloud if it didn't exist until it was spoken aloud.
Well, if you make the distinction that things must observe themselves, if they can't observe themselves, then that presupposes the idea of like a sort of a an external observer, right?
Super observer, a super observer. It's everywhere and sees everything.
Um, I guess that it kind of goes back to like the philosophical question of whether or not something exists when you're not there to perceive it, right? I think that's essentially like what you're asking, right?
Well, no, I'm saying, well, yeah, sure. I'm saying, what is it that it feels to us as though we are able to distinctly observe our own feelings and such. But who is that I that is distinctly observing the I's own feelings is a very difficult question to answer. And in fact, the illusion of the self itself, the notion of a single I, a single individual human entity, is something that would itself seem to require observation, and yet it exists prior to are observing it. So how would that in fact be the case if it's internal, if it's not observed? Well, I guess it is observed by other entities, but there are lots of elements of it that aren't. Then how would it be that that could exist, sans observation, without a super observer?
Well, I would say that, or the way I view metaphysics is that an object exists in essence, and the information that we receive to identify the traits of an object in essence are impressions that the essence of the object makes upon the external realm. So there's an external realm, and everything that exists within the external realm exists in essence, and then it manifests impressions onto the external realm, and that would be information, right? So the things exist in essence, but the traits that define them don't exist until they're perceived. That's how I view metaphysics.
Well, I don't see this essence thing as having any meaning, or as being a really distinct term that means that refers to anything specific.
Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't worked that out yet.
Right, we'll figure that out.
I'll figure that out eventually.
Here's my question is, with all of religion aside right now, like, what is your guys' opinion on how everything got here?
Well, it seems to me it breaks down to basically we can understand the world that we live in through mathematical laws.
I don't just mean the world. I mean everything, space. I mean,
Well, yeah, that's what I'm like
it-
building up to. So basically,
He's walking down the path to it.
Yeah.
It's gonna take him a few
yeah,
steps.
I think we can explain most phenomena, if not all, in our external world through mathematical equations, right? But something happened at the beginning of the universe that made 0 equal 1, basically, right? And that's like the tricky part. So I think a lot of that's why there's a lot of I suppose disagreement over how that exactly happened. My personal view on it, I don't know. I just don't fucking know. Like, I have no idea.
That's my perspective as well. I have no fucking clue.
And that's the thing I really
I thought
like
about it a lot. I thought about it a shitload
Same.
too. I have no idea.
That's something I really like about what you guys are saying out there, is that you guys are searching for the truth. Because if you're truly searching for the truth, I can't just say Christianity is right and everything else is wrong, because that means I'm not really searching for the truth. But that means I'm closed-minded. But to actually search for the truth is I got to listen to what other people have to say.
You can be inclined toward a position.
Whatever it might be, search for the truth. So I like what you guys are saying there, that you guys are actually searching for the truth. And
Well, I like your question about morality too, and I think it's a strong line of argumentation in favor of a monotheistic religion, because to me, I have a system worked out where I think this is moral, that's not moral, whatever. It comes down to a prohibition on unjustified violence, which is core to, I think, Christianity as it is to just about every religion. There's an objection to using force and forcing people and harming people and doing bad things that I totally agree with and find consistent with my own sense of my own personal morality and my own public ethics.
So what do you think? What do you guys think happens whenever we die? Do you think we just go straight to the ground? I mean, what do you guys think?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't think that. I think that the only thing that the thing that puzzles me is that the mind-body dilemma, where it's like your metacognition, right? Your consciousness. You could argue that's something that's immaterial, but the thing is that the information that the immaterial consciousness would then access would be material, right? So your consciousness perceives information from the external world. It perceives information from your internal world, from your internal processes, and from past experiences. So if you remove all of those biological factors, even if you could argue that consciousness would exist in an immaterial sense, what would you be perceiving, right? I think that's where the issue comes in, where I don't necessarily disbelieve in an afterlife. I wonder what would be perceived, right? I think that's primarily what I'm interested in.
And is there an identity beyond the process of consciousness? That's another tricky question.
Yeah.
I didn't hear. Can you say that again?
Is there an identity beyond the process of consciousness, the process of living through it, through the moments of your life? Do you have an identity that persists, or that is a whole, or that in some way exists beyond that process of going through moment to moment life? Are you beyond what you do? Beyond how you are being in every given moment? Are you beyond what you do? That's the question, really.
I believe so, but I also don't believe that my actions. I don't think my identity comes from what I do. I think my identity and worth comes from Jesus. So that was like, if someone says you're a party or this or that, I don't believe that's where my identity comes from, honestly. So for me, I believe that my identity and worth solely comes from God, and this is why. It's because I don't have to live up to the standards that society puts on me. That you're a little too this, you're a little too that. You gotta do this, you gotta do that. Because honestly, their opinions don't matter. So that's where I think my worth comes from, and identity, and yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's a very valuable belief system for you. It sounds like it's very effective.
It is.
Like whereas Zach and I, our answers are, I don't know. You've got answers for those sort of things, right? That's the advantage of it.
You have answers, because even though you have the answers, there's still times people think that once you become a Christian that it's easy and you don't have doubts, but it's not the case at all. You still have your doubts. There's still times I doubt that there's a God. There's still times that whenever I'm praying, I feel like I'm just making a relationship with these walls. And there's times I honestly do doubt if there is a God, but then I always get that reassurance. Especially miracles. I've saw miracles in person, and I've done miracles in real life. I've saw it and I've done it. But how can we explain what miracles are and how they've done?
Could you give us an example of a miracle?
A miracle, yeah. All right. So someone in my family, they had really back problems, really bad. They had what's it called? Their discs were torn and all this, and her knee was real bad. She had surgery. It was swollen. It was real bad. And I prayed about it, and there was X-rays too, and we prayed about it, and I prayed hard about it, and then she said she felt a big rush through her body, and the next day we went to the doctor, Bobby Hall, and we got X-rays, and her back was completely fine. There was no disc wrong, nothing was wrong, and there's the dates on the X-ray that showed from this to this, and her knee looks like there was no surgery. There was completely nothing wrong with her whatsoever.
What else did you do prior to that, though? Besides pray.
No.
Well, there's a lot of things you did prior to her getting healed, right? For example, you, I don't know, watched a television show, went to the bathroom, took a shower, planted something in the garden. Why should we assume that it has to do with that one action of the multitude of actions you took prior to her getting better?
What was it was the next day. It was in one day that this happened. So I honestly believe that, but as soon as I said amen, she felt a huge rush through her body. Then the next day when we went and we got the X-rays, she was completely healed. And I have other people that can tell you countless things that have happened. But I don't believe that it happens all the time. I mean, I believe it happens, but I believe that's God's time. I don't believe that I can just go up to anyone and just be like, oh, you're healed, you're healed, you're healed. Because that's doing it for me and not God's glory. So I think that, that'd be my question, is not just where miracles come from, but how do they happen? We can look around and see that miracles do happen.
Okay, well, I would say that unexplained things happen. That's true. But just because there's not a satisfactory explanation doesn't mean it's miraculous. And regardless, that seems like a poor way to go about establishing the validity of one's faith. To expect the miraculous as a means of saying that one's faith is legitimate seems an unfair task to assign to faith. I would argue that faith is more justified by one's individual experience than anything else.
You said it.
Well, I have a certain amount of faith that stems from my quitting drinking, during which time I called upon God to help me quite a bit. And he did, and I think it would be hubris, which is to say pride against God, for me to try to attribute it to anything else. And it's possible I could come up with rationalist models to explain what happened there. It would be more satisfactory to a rationalist mind. But I would not dare do that. It would feel like hubris to me.
So you do believe in God or a God?
I believe that God allowed me to quit drinking, yeah.
And
Without God, I would have been unable to do so. So I don't know what you can deduce, whatever you want to deduce from that. I think it's perfectly reasonable to deduce that I therefore believe in God. I don't know if I'd necessarily agree with that statement in every sense, in every circumstance, but I would say it's a reasonable deduction to draw.
Would you believe that everyone has faith in something that?
Well, it's hard to. It's hard to like. Regardless of whether or not God exists, the experiences that people associate with God and spiritual progression, things like that, certainly manifest themselves in a real way. So it's tricky to me to define, what is and isn't real when regarding spiritual matters. So I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know.
I believe everyone has faith. I believe that I can tell you that you have faith. You have faith that you're going to take your next breath. You have faith that whenever you take a next step, that your knees going to support you, your legs going to support you. You have faith that your eyelids are going to blink. You have faith that your heart's going to keep beating. I believe that we all have faith in something. I think that's right there's proof that we have faith that that's going to happen, even though we don't have proof that's going to happen. So
That's belief. That's not faith. That's belief. Belief is behaving as though something were certain, even though it's not, based on the fact that it's likely, more or less, what you're talking about. Whereas faith is belief in the absence of any sort of objectively verifiable evidence, and or in the presence of contrary evidence to believe anyway.
But you have evidence that will keep beating, though, is my question.
Well, sure, you've got all the existing data suggests it will.
But like evidence saying that right now that you will take your next heartbeat, your heart will keep beating.
All the evidence we have suggests that it will. There's no reason to assume it won't continue on the existing pattern indefinitely until we have reason to assume it won't. So I would say, yeah, we do have good reason to believe, without having any faith, that we're going to continue to persist for the next 10 or 15 minutes at least. Beyond that, maybe there's a certain amount of there's a little bit less justification for it. I don't think it requires faith to operate on that assumption that you're going to continue to live for a while. I think it requires some suspension of disbelief, let's say. But I don't think that quite requires faith. It's like I don't need faith to assume the sun's going to set in the west. I've got all the data in my entire life to suggest that it will.
Yeah. What do you guys think about evolution? I believe in evolution, but if we look, we have evolved. So I personally do believe in evolution.
The evidence certainly seems to suggest it, right?
I find it wholly unconvincing.
Oh, really?
That we have evolved?
Yeah, well, look, there's no doubt the species undergo some change. We've yet to document a species divesting into two different species. No matter how much we breed them into two tribes, our damnedest, you can still get two dogs get pregnant with each other, even though one's a Chihuahua and one's a Great Dane. It's never been documented there's been a change in species by our definition of species, which is can mate and reproduce new offspring. As far as I know, you could prove me wrong, but I believe that to be the case. And I just find it it's missing a key factor of some sort. There's a Lamarckian element to it. There has to be. It doesn't make sense that evolution would evolve in the fashion that it did, based on random mutations and that sort of thing. Even given the amount of time that it's had, it doesn't make any sense, especially the human mind. It obviously is evolving based on some sort of time object ecosystem, and therefore all consciousnesses do. And so why is it that certain species would end where they do and not continue to evolve? And there's no record, archaeological record, really, of species continuing to evolve. There's what they call missing links, which is some other species is kind of like half and one and half the other. That doesn't prove that they evolved. Where is the moment at which a species becomes a different species? Why can't we find that moment? So that's why I'm skeptical about the conventional understanding of evolution. I don't think it accounts for consciousness. I don't think it accounts for the way that humanity is getting smarter despite the fact that we're biologically not changing anymore, there's a lot of things it doesn't account for. I'm not satisfied by it.
What do you think, Zach?
It's an interesting perspective. It's something I'm from my current understandings I'm inclined toward, but I'm open to change.
I mean, the consciousness thing, I think, is the critical thing. Why is it that humanity keeps getting smarter and scoring higher and higher on intelligence tests and stuff like that, and clearly evolving as a species beyond the scope of their physical evolution? And why isn't it that other species wouldn't, even though other species can communicate to some extent or another? Or are they in ways that we're not aware of?
Well,
I think that's where God separated us from animals, as in we know what's right and what's wrong, and that we can learn in a sense languages. We can do this, we can do that. If we look, we're separated from any other animal.
So you're saying the capacity for moral reasoning and the capacity for metacognition are the two things that separate us from the animals, and I would agree with that. But it doesn't change the fact. It doesn't answer the question that I'm having about evolution. If evolution evolved on a consciousness level, as humanity is evolving on a consciousness level, as well as on a physical level, then if that mechanism were in fact the driving mechanism of evolution, then it should appear at all levels of species, and it doesn't.
Yeah, but doesn't that assume though that intelligence? See, one of your arguments was that intelligence our average IQ is continuously increasing on the whole, but there's no more biological changes. But that doesn't necessarily mean we could have just had. It took us a while to develop the civilized system which we live in, and the civilized system could be fertile for the development of abstract thought like that,
okay, but our anthills change.
Wait, what?
Our anthills are the kind of, we keep making anthills, but the anthills change, and that's the only species in which that occurs, right? We've always made anthills of some sort, whether it was caves with paintings inside of them, or whether it's some sort of like mound the Indians lived in, or whether it's some kind of medieval hut in Europe, or whether it's a skyscraper now. We've always made our little hills, but they keep changing, and there's a lot of variation between them. Now, the thing is, it shows that consciousness itself is capable of adapting to changes in the environment, and yet we see no reflection of that really in animal species, unless I'm wrong. I mean, we may be not seeing. The thing is, we may not be seeing changes that are existing on some level that we're not noticing. You know,
well, I think that
just because the anthill looks the same to us doesn't mean it looks the same to the ants.
Well, I think our best understanding of what constitutes intelligence is some genetic factors and then some environmental factors, right? So the way I see it is that as we progress our institutions and our education systems, it just seems to me that we're more fertile for allowing the transition into higher IQs, right? It's not something that was required before, but now as we become more civilized, we are adapting to our environments through our IQs because we are adapting to the current institutions we've set up, and it just keeps.
You see, I think our identities themselves are comprised of the depth of intellectual and emotional experience that we attain over the course of our lifetime. And I think that the said experience is increasing every generation as each generation has more access to more fluid information and therefore is able to interface with more different realities and maximize where they're good at and avoid where they're bad at, basically. Become type actualized, so to speak. But the thing is, I guess what I'm saying is this. Evolution is clearly existing in more ways than simply our old-fashioned Darwinian evolution, right? I mean, it's not physical mutations that are causing these changes in how humanity manifests in its environment. It's something else. So the species is changing, and yet it's not through physical mutation. We know the species
but that doesn't necessarily imply that we didn't recently, or it doesn't necessarily imply that we didn't already have the receptibility to certain advancements in the first place. It just has taken us this long to build up an external environment that allows us to achieve that.
Okay, but so here's the thing then. You're assuming that a species, how would it be that a species would evolve a bunch of hardware capabilities vastly exceeding their need at the time or their ability to put them into use?
Well, that's because their environment at the time didn't allow, it wasn't fertile enough for it to flourish. But as things have slowly advanced, it's allowed the environment to become more fertile for us to access the full extent of our faculties. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, according to the Darwinian evolution model, there'd be no need, no advantage to developing the capacity for these advanced things beyond which the organism benefits from in the survival of the fittest model, right? So how could it be that an organism that hasn't changed genetically for 25,000 years is now displaying the capacity to utilize tools and depth of modeling and depth of thinking that vastly exceeds anything that the species itself could possibly have needed to survive back when it changed from Neanderthal or whatever to Homo sapiens?
Well,
that doesn't make any sense to me. These capacities were not needed when you're living in a fucking cave trying to shoot a fucking deer.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, though. It's like the environment didn't allow it because we just didn't need it. But as we slowly become civilized, we've accessed.
But then it didn't demand it either. Then it didn't demand it genetically. It didn't demand the species genetically produce the ability to exercise things that they did not need.
Because they had to start
it's
from
like,
scratch.
oh, well, let's give you wings because 2,000 years from now you're going to need to fly. That doesn't make any sense to me, right? And it seems to me that on a cognitive level, that's exactly what the species has done. They produced a physical organism that has all the abilities in place to do things well beyond what that organism could possibly need to do in the environment in which it's supposedly changed into this new species called Homo sapiens.
Yeah, but the missing link doesn't necessarily mean that evolution doesn't exist. It just means that there's something that happened with consciousness that we can't account for at the moment.
Okay, but so what I'm saying is then Darwinian evolution doesn't explain things very wholly at all, because the species has changed even though the genetics of the species is not. And if in fact Darwinian evolution were right, we wouldn't have the ability to take advantage of these things without genetic changes.
Perhaps.
Why can't ants?
Perhaps.
Why don't ants over the course of time change? Why don't anything else? Right?
I mean,
isn't that where we're deriving our understanding of Darwinian mechanisms?
Well, I don't have the answers, but if I had to answer based on my current understandings, I'd say that there had to be something that either some environmental factor or perhaps a metaphysical influence that made the human species receptive to developing consciousness. I don't know what that is, but that is a good point, though, that the fact that if we already have our full genetic faculties and they're not changing, that then how are we increasing in IQ? That's a really good point. That is a good point, though.
Michael's explanation is as good as any. Well, God made us separate from the animals. I mean, that explanation is just as good as any that we have, really.
That is true.
Besides that, I got nothing. I'm not gonna try to act like I know, but I really don't.
Well, I mean, I don't think either of us ultimately know either. We're just kind of like discussing,
Right. We're bouncing ideas back and forth because these sort of metaphysical concepts provide little closure except through the mechanism of faith, where you have a satisfactory position that you're going to settle on as that into which you invest your faith, and then you feel a certain amount of well, that's the end of the philosophical discussion. It doesn't feel to me like the end of the philosophical discussion for some reason. I think it has to do with personality type as well. Certain types are probably more satisfied by faith than others. I think we should probably try to type you. We should make a separate video and try to type you. What do you think,
Yeah, let
Jack?
me wrap this one up. This is a good video. Thanks for watching Talking with Famous People.
Yeah, that's a good one.